All right. There you go, everybody. Sorry about that. So, um, we'll go back here. So they move in a very different manner than earthworms and all of those kinds of guys. And so, but what happens is they take that first top layer of soil, whether it's between plants, the roots of trees, anything like that, and they reduce that soil to look like coffee grounds. And I've got a better picture of this here next, but they reproduce heavily, and their worm castings they just get loads of them in a very small area, and they completely destroy the soil structure in a spot, in a location. And if they get enough of them, it turns into a really large location. And so they just destroy the soil structure, which makes it so that the roots and everything that's in there is no longer to hold on to the soil. And so if you have it around trees, the trees can blow down really easily. If you have it around hostas and different types of perennials and garden plants and those kinds of things, they're highly susceptible to other diseases, and they don't hold water very well, and it's a really terrible thing. So this is like the number one thing you look for in looking for jumping worms, is this just very pelletized coffee ground type soil structure that you'll see above the ground. And so they are different looking slightly than earthworms. And so they have a light colored ring that goes fully around the body. It's also really smooth. So if you think about earthworms, if you go fishing and that kind of thing, it's called a clitellum, is the ring that goes around the worm, is slightly raised, and it's bigger and more toward the center of the worm. And on jumping worms, they are really flat, really light colored, and much closer to the head of the worm. And so jumping worms have gotten their name because they thrash violently and appear to jump when they're handled. So this is another video that we've got from Wisconsin of them just going crazy. So that's how the jumping worms act, and what you can expect to see if you have some in your area. And so they are, again, slightly different. They're recognizably different than earthworms. And so they have the clitellum, again, is raised around the worm. It's more toward the center, and it's not as light colored as that of the jumping worm. And so you can see the difference here in this picture between the two types of and when I started learning about jumping worms, clitellum was a word that I just didn't know before. So it's the ring around the worm. So it's always learning something new. So the way the life cycle works of jumping worms is that toward the beginning of the season through summer, they're nearly impossible to identify, because the way their life cycle works is the worm lives from summer, and it reproduces through the summer and fall, and then it dies off in the winter. It doesn't overwinter like earthworms do. And so it has these really, really small cocoons that are that have eggs. And so with that, the eggs are laid on soil, on leaf matter, on plants, and those kinds of things. But they are millimeters across. And so they're brown, they blend in with soil, so they're really nearly impossible to see. And so we'll talk about strategies for dealing with that in just a little bit. But with their life cycle, it's hard to see them in the spring. And it's just in July when they start to become active, and you'll start to see the effects of them in your gardens. And so this is slightly outdated here, but you can see the difference on that left side. August 9th of 2020 is where they're identified in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And just 6 months later, 8 months later, it had spread significantly throughout Minnesota. And now there were 2 added this year. Most of those were added in the fall. And then that farthest southeast county in Minnesota, I think maybe Howard, it might be. I forget what the name of that county is, but that farthest southeast has also been added to this list as well. And so, Jane, it looks like Wright County is on there. So maybe that's north of Wright County. something like that. So you can see the list through there as to where they've been identified. And I'll send you everybody a link to see where the identifications have happened in your area. So as it's identified through the U of M system that they use for invasive species, you can see where who has identified them and have a picture of what the identification looked like, so it's verified and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting. So they were first believed to come to Minnesota, introduced through as fishing bait, and so that's where they first came from in the United States, not to Minnesota, sorry. And they first came to the United States through fishing bait. Like I said, they're native to Asia, where they have natural predators, but they can be moved around through mulch, through compost, through soil, through different plants. And that's their main mechanism of moving now. So, like if you think about emerald ash borer and how EAB moves primarily through firewood and by people spreading EAB via firewood, this jumping worms are spread through plants and by people moving them around to different areas and that kind of thing. So that's how it is moved generally, is by plant material. So what we need to do is prevention, just like most, I mean, we talk as gardeners and as people involved in gardening, we talk about prevention as and integrated pest management and those kinds of things as the way to stop problems before they become critically difficult and that kind of deal. And so with jumping worms, prevention is, again, the key to a lot of making sure that we are taking care of things, that we are avoiding having this become a big problem. So identifying it early, and so by identifying it, it's just looking for that soil. It's looking through your plants and looking under your mulch as well to look for that coffee ground looking soil. And so the U of M is working on a project, which we'll get to in a little bit here, to identify as many locations as you can in Minnesota that have this. So it's also really important that you are purchasing plants and mulch and compost from reputable sources, that you don't have folks that are just digging things up and moving them around without being conscientious of how that is working, and being able to, from the source materials, being able to identify jumping worms on that side of things as well. So one thing, we did this class back in the last time we did it would have been May, and we had a lot of folks from Ramsey County. So I don't know if anybody else is from Ramsey County on here today, but we had a lot of folks from Ramsey County that were here with us. And in St. Paul, there are a lot of different identifications of jumping worm in St. Paul. And so jumping worms are really prevalent there. And so a lot of neighborhoods are trying to inform and to teach their neighbors about what this is and how it's happening. Because if somebody takes, what you normally as a good neighbor would be to take some rhubarb or take some hosta and split it and share it, then you are sharing that jumping worm with other folks. And so as you are sharing plants, especially in the spring when you can't see those little cocoons that are involved, you need to make sure to remove and rinse all of the soil from the source. So you want to take, and if you are dividing, rhubarb is a great example in the spring, if you're dividing something like that, you need to make sure that you are rinsing all the soil off and all the source soil off of those plants, and then you're replanting it clean into your location and into your garden. So you're making sure, or making pretty sure, that you're not carrying those types of things around with you. So jumping worms are really difficult to eradicate once an infestation has taken hold. These are voracious reproducers. So they're like little rabbits, which I know we all have rabbit issues as well. But they are really difficult once they get going to take care of. And so, but one thing you can do is that, again, you need to make sure that you are checking often. So as you're watering things and as you're looking through, and make sure in this time of year, and again every month until the end of the year, that you are checking your soil specifically for that soil type, and so that coffee ground looking soil type, and that you're looking at those things. And then if you do find them, you find them hopefully early enough so that they haven't really taken hold. And then you can do a process called vermifuge, which is a fun word to say, obviously, but what it is you take 1/3 of a cup of ground mustard, So what you get at the grocery store, that type of ground mustard, and you mix that with 1 gallon of water. And so what it is that ground mustard has a reagent in it that affects, and this works also for earthworms as well. So it's for earthworms, and it also affects jumping worms, but it reacts with their skin, and it's an irritant on their skin, and it doesn't do any harm to the forest floor. It doesn't do any harm to your plant materials. It doesn't do anything like that. It's not a chemical that does anything negative in that way. But what it is you take and you mix that up, and then you pour it slowly onto the soil, and all the worms will come to the surface because that's an irritant, and that will force them up. So you pour it slowly into the soil, and that will force them up. So if you find an infestation, you want to document it and report it to the U of M and to other folks. And again, I'll email those links to everybody. But you want to, if you do find them, you take this mustard solution and do this vermifuge, and then that forces them up to the soil. And then just like I don't know if you do, but I every day go out and pick off my Japanese beetles, which we'll get to in a little bit as well, but pick off the Japanese beetles and dispose of them I do mine with my chickens. And so, but that's the same way here, is that you put the ground mustard in the soil, and then as those jumping worms, as they surface, you can pluck them out and reduce the population and keep them from multiplying, and keep them at bay in your location. So the U of M has a ton of really great training as well, and they have become a host site for searching for jumping worms. It's nationally renowned, so it's a really, really good resource we have here in Minnesota. So at least every couple weeks, every month, check your garden for worms. And so check and look for that soil that looks different than what you normally would expect, because you as gardeners, you know what your soil is supposed to look like in general. And if you see things that are different, if you see things, plants that are starting to yellow, things like that are happening, and you look at that soil, look for that. And if you do find them, report it immediately to the U of M, and they'll help you out with those for sure. So, and as well, try and reduce the amount of moving around of soils and plants and those kinds of things. So check all of your new plants, soil, compost, and mulch for jumping worms. And so there's a question about bagged mulch earlier, and it has not, in theory, it could absolutely happen that bagged mulch spreads jumping worms, but it hasn't been documented that I have seen that it actually is a way that is moving around. It is more in plant materials through plant swaps and those kinds of things, where jumping worms are spreading from one location to another. It's also been documented in topsoil as well, that if topsoil gets peeled off the top layer from a new development or something like that that's happening, that will be able to move jumping worms from there as well. And compost is another way that it can move around. And if compost, and this goes back to reputable sources and purchasing things from places that you trust that are doing the right things, compost, for a whole host of reasons, needs to get cooked for quite some time at a high degree of temperatures, and the cocoons and the worms cannot survive through that. And so compost, if it's properly treated, which it isn't always properly treated, can be a vector for moving jumping worms around as well. So this is what the document looks like for reporting the identification to the U of M. And again, I'll send this out to everyone so you have it. But it collects your name, information. You need to take a picture of the jumping worm. And so there are a lot of folks that are working really hard to contain this before it gets out of control. So I will stop sharing right now and head back to the Zoom and just see, does anybody, we've got a lot of folks on here. So thanks for people that I didn't say hello to earlier who had joined. And just want to see, does anybody else have questions or things you'd like to go into deeper levels of information about before we move on to other types of pests? Because as I've done this a couple different times, people have a lot of questions about them. So is there anything that you'd like to know more about?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what months are we supposed to actually be seeing it? Like, when do we start looking for adults, and how, like,
Now,
when do they mature? Okay,
yep,
so
yep.
typically late
Now is
summer.
Yep. So the way their life cycle works is that they are in that cocoon stage. They overwinter in the cocoon egg stage, and then they're really small and they're not doing much damage for the spring once they come out. But it's once they start to be an adult. The adults in Minnesota have been identified as early as March and April. So if you just happen across one, you can still see them at that point, the individual worm itself, but you don't start to see the massive amounts of damage and that really changed soil structure, which is the easiest way to identify them. That doesn't start to happen until summer. So that's when you'll see them the most. That's when you're the most likely to see them and be able to identify that as a piece. But if you just have earthworms hanging around that you see and they have that very specific motion that they've got all those that you can absolutely identify them earlier than that, but you can't really see the signs of them being in your landscape until later on.
Got it. Sorry, I have a couple more too, if that's okay.
Roll with it. Yeah, Sarah, thank you.
Okay. So I have known that you should, rinse the plants, if you're getting them from a friend or something. And I did that with a friend who lives in Longfellow because she was like, I think my neighborhood has been I think someone's identified them here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I didn't know what to do with the water. What am I mean, ideally you would rinse them in that person's yard, but sometimes that's not always possible.
Yeah, for sure. So the best way to do that for sure is to leave all of the soil and water and everything at the source, and so that it keeps it from spreading to other areas for sure. But if you are doing that, then make sure to do it if you are at your house, the best way to do that is to have it on like a driveway or something like that. We obviously don't want significant amounts of soil and things going into our stormwater system, but this is, I think, one of those little tiny examples where it makes sense to have that happen in that direction, as opposed to doing it in your lawn and those kinds of things. And so that's what I would recommend there, is just keep it out of your landscape areas.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And mostly what I should do is I'm just going to not accept plants from other people's yards anymore. But okay, my last question. Someone anecdotally, I was helping a friend weed her garden, and someone anecdotally came up on the sidewalk and said, he may have been exaggerating, but he was like, yeah, in 5 years, everyone will have jumping worms. And I was like, oh, wow, how exactly? And he was like, well, birds will spread it. So is that actually possible? Obviously, we don't know everything yet, but I don't know. Are those projections that the U of M is making?
No, that is
Okay.
by no means a projection that I have seen from the U of M, or anyone in the scientific realm, on the horticultural realm of things. That
Okay.
yes, it will spread. Yes, it can also be spread by birds as well, because those really crazy flapping attracts birds also. So it can be spread by that way, which is how they think that it got to the arboretum at Wisconsin. Is
Oh,
they think it got through natural ways of moving them around, is how that got in there, because it was in a very wooded native area through there, and so it wasn't necessarily a place where they would have expected when a new coral bell got planted from a neighbor or from somebody else. That's how they believe that it happened in that instance. And so, but most of it, the spread is happening now via plant material moving around and different types of mulch and that kind of thing. So for sure. But yes, it will be spreading, and that's why the U of M is working really hard to get a good handle on where it is now and where it's not located now, and those types of things. So you're totally correct.
when
We
you
had
I have a question.
Yep, go for it. Who is
Um,
Maggie?
this is Maggie. Yeah. Um, the the video that I see, I can't get my computer working, but so I'm looking at my iPhone,
Mhm.
and the video that you showed, it just looked like a whole bunch of still shots, and like a series of still shots. And my whole purpose of this is I wanted to see the activity of a jumping worm, because I thought I saw one. I saw something unusual in my yard, and
Okay.
I want to know, is there um, a link on the U of M site that shows a jumping worm's activities?
Yeah, for sure. So the videos that I showed were both from YouTube. And so if you go
Oh,
on, if you go YouTube and just do, and I'll make a note here to link to those videos as well because I'll
okay.
send up a follow-up email after this. And so I'll send out links to those videos also. But if you just Google jumping worms Minnesota or jumping worms Wisconsin, especially, there you'll be able to see quite a few different things. And I can, was it that way for everybody? Could you see the video, or was it just choppy?
It was choppy.
It was
Mm,
pretty choppy.
dang, sorry. So yeah, I can absolutely send out those links so that works. So yeah, Lisa.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, Maggie.
I just wanted to also comment that I live in the right near Mother Earth Gardens in the Howe area of South Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just notified people that they did find jumping worms in some of their plants,
Mm.
and were trying to track down people that purchased those plants. And I'm like, God, that's scary that, even from, I mean, they're a reputable nursery, and they're, doing what they can and notifying people, but it kind of makes you want to just stick to your own plants in your own yard.
Yeah, for sure. And so usually like in garden center and nursery settings, depending, and I'm not too familiar with Mother Earth there, but in the majority that like when you plant, you know, what's a good example? When you plant a black-eyed Susan in a gallon container, that soil that you have in there is generally going to be sterilized soil and that kind of thing. So they're going to have usually are those types of instances. And so it all depends on like, it could be something where they overwintered because when you overwinter perennials, you tip them on their side generally, and then you cover them. And it could be something like that where it got involved, and or it could be from a wholesaler that they got it from as well. And so I don't know their operation there as to how that could move forward and how that happened. But it by buying from reputable places, that's going to minimize there, but it's going to happen in places. So you just need to be vigilant and making sure that you're inspecting those plants and looking at them as best as you can. Does that make sense? Yeah. Perfect. Lisa.
Are there herbs or native plants that we can do, put in our yard and in our garden that will help repel them so they don't establish? Is
Yeah,
there anything known like that?
that's a really great question. There's a ton of research being done around those things right now, but there's nothing that's been, I mean, it's only been since 2006. So they were first identified in Minnesota, and it was right pretty early that they were identified here from when the infestation started to happen in the United States. And so with that, there's research being done on them, but there is absolutely nothing conclusive for good companion plants. And we'll talk about companion plants in a little bit when we get into like cabbage worms and stuff like that. But there's nothing that's been proven to be helpful with those, or even really anecdotal evidence yet for things that are helpful for keeping jumping worms that I've seen anyway, or that the U of M has communicated for stuff like that happening. Teresa, will come to you in just a second. Michaela, I got your question here of, do they share space with earthworms? And the answer is absolutely yes. They do share space with earthworms. In general, earthworms are deeper than jumping worms are. One thing that we've got going for us is jumping worms, they're in the very shallow top 2-3 inches of soil. And so they stay really, really shallow. They do not go deep whatsoever. So that's why that having the mustard solution really helps to identify and pull those guys out so that they can so you can remove them as many as you possibly can and keep them from laying their eggs for the next year. So that's an important thing. Did you have another question, Michaela?
No, that was it.
Perfect. Good. Teresa, you have your hand up. Teresa, I don't know if you're talking or not, but you're still muted. Let's see if I can do it this way.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Hey, Teresa.
Okay. Do they have them in Anoka County?
They are in the North Metro. Yes. Specifically in Anoka County, I am not 100% sure. Let me go back to that map. See if I can. I'm from Shakopee, so the North Metro always confuses me.
Well, you know, last summer I had something going on with my grass where I had a huge area, like 20 by 20 feet, that the grass just simply died. It turned yellow, and if you pulled the grass up, there wasn't a root to be found.
That's gross.
And it wasn't grub. It wasn't grub. I mean, if it was,
really?
They dug up looking for grubs and they couldn't find any.
Huh.
I had a couple of different guys out here and nobody could figure out what the heck was going on. I still don't know.
Interesting.
But
Yeah,
I did see some really suspicious looking worms. I noticed they'd come out on the driveway when it rained, and they didn't look like the typical angleworm to me.
Yeah.
They had that look that I'm seeing that you're showing.
Got it. So yeah, if you had that last year, then they're absolutely going to still be there this year if it is jumping worms. And so it is, and you could be generally they don't affect turf as much. At least I haven't seen any reports about them affecting turf as much. They like more open organic matter and leaf matter and those kinds of things. But that would be really interesting to see now that you kind of have it, and I wish my video would work better for everybody, but and I'll try it again here in a little bit too, just to see if that works any better. But now that you kind of know how they work and what their process is, you can look and see what see if you can identify any there and see. But yeah, I just look back at the map and they are definitely in Anoka County for sure. So they've been identified in Anoka County. So yeah, they've been Hennepin, if most folks are from the metro. So Wright, Anoka, Hennepin, Ramsey, Dakota, Carver. So those are the ones in the metro, and then quite a few to the south yet. So yeah, I would, it's absolutely worth a look to go and see what you can find in that area again.
Yeah, I'll do that. And if I do find something suspicious, then I should report it to the U of M. Absolutely.
Yep. So that form that I showed the picture of, I'll send the link out. I don't know if it's an email that's going out tonight, but I'll make sure that link gets out to everybody, or you can just Google U of M jumping worms. And so that has a lot of resources from them. And there's a citizens reporting section on there, which has really solid information. And so they also do, I don't know if they're doing it anymore right now, but this spring they were doing weekly trainings as well for jumping worms also from the U of M. So that was really good. And that's where I learned first about all the information. Was I went to one of those trainings and then started learning more because it's important for folks to know. So it's a really important thing that people need to figure out. So, and to pay attention to and to watch out for and that kind of stuff. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on to other kinds of things? Yeah, Jane.
How do you dispose of them?
It
Will they
populate even after you kind of split them, or I don't know.
Yeah, you absolutely want to kill them. You don't want to just put them in your garbage kind of thing and send them other places. So yeah, just I highly recommend just stepping on them. Take a picture first so that you can report them to the U. But definitely just squish them and you'll be fine that way. A lot like cabbage worms.
The residue will populate anymore then.
No, yep. Once you squish them, they're gone.
Okay.
Yep.
When you talked about rinsing the plants on your driveway, could there be any of the little babies in that matter that's on your driveway?
Yep.
And if that's so, how can you put something on there after you've rinsed to get rid of them?
Yeah, the problem with these things is that those little egg sac cocoons are so small, they're really difficult to identify as different than. So if it were one thing where you could just scout and look and see and see those, so like you're talking about cabbage worms, but if you have broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts, you can go and you can see the little cabbage worm eggs that are on there, and you can identify that, and that's an identifiable piece where what you're looking for, and that is an issue there. But these are they brown? They mix, they visually mix in with the soil really, really well. They look like 1,000 different other things, and so that's why it's important to wash them off, so you get everything that looks like that off of the plant. And again, it's preferable to do it before. So do it from where those plants are coming from, so you don't have to worry about moving those kinds of things onto your ground and driveway, that kind of thing. But if that just doesn't work out, then on your driveway, and it's a risk for sure, but it's minimizing the issues and the potential.
Do they travel through water? Because you said that a lot of fishermen, so do they travel through water?
As I understand, they don't live, like the worms themselves don't live in water. The egg sac cocoons can live in water for sure. And so you'll want to like spray off your driveway and just do general cleanup kinds of things. And that, in theory, will help to reduce the potential for them populated. But the worms themselves don't live in aquatic situations. They were just brought in as bait, and they got dumped somewhere, and that's where it happened.
Sure. Okay.
Perfect. I love all the questions. That always makes my job a lot better when we have good questions for things. So thank you. I appreciate it. Louise asks, what types of things are currently being done to educate the agriculture world in our state? So this is a really great question, Louise. And so there are a lot of different efforts being done. So I'm assuming that everybody kind of found out about this because there was a huge media push this spring around jumping worms. And so they're really great for stories because they're scary looking, and people are we're always excited to have something to talk about that's not politics, and jumping worms are a really good thing there. And so there was a big media push that was very much pushed by the U of M and by other institutes this spring. And so there's a ton of work being done there. There's another group called, I'm blanking on the name right now, but Earthworm. It's a Lake Superior, so it's upper Midwest earthworm conglomerate kind of thing that's really working hard as well, because while earthworms and jumping worms can absolutely live in the same area and live in the same types of areas, when jumping worms obliterate the top layer of soil, it makes it really terrible for earthworms, therefore, to live there. And so it kills a lot of that habitat that earthworms are successful with. And so it's a really important thing to a lot of different folks. So there's a bunch of work being done to educate folks about this. There's a lot of work by the Minnesota Nursery and Landscape Association. They are hitting this really hard as well on the growers and on the nursery side of things. for them to be educating their customers and their clients and those kinds of things. And like we talked about earlier with nurseries, if they find them, to do their best to get information out to folks. And so that's there's a lot being done around this. Like it seems and feels a lot more successful to me right now for what I'm seeing for jumping worms than like emerald ash borer education was early on. Like it was just brutal to get people to care at all about emerald ash borer early on, and you just had to show forests of dead trees, and they're like, it's not here. Why are we worried about this? And it is really caught up to us, and so we've got major issues with that. But I see people reacting and working on this a lot more than other issues as they am. So I'm really pretty pleased with the levels of education and things that are happening with this, and you guys will take and go tell your neighbors. And when the guy walks by Sarah's friend's house sometime, and then you can say, hey, this is how you know what's going on and this is what's happening with it. So it's all good stuff. Yeah, Jane.
Does this affect the farmers?
Yes, absolutely. It very much, if there are infestations, would affect farmers. And there's been like the Minnesota Department of Ag has been really like a lot of the good information is from the Department of Ag. The DNR is also working really hard on it in Minnesota. So I'm a farm kid from Iowa, so it is absolutely something that farmers are paying attention to. It doesn't. There's a lot of pressures on from invasive bugs and weeds and other things, and so I don't feel like it's really risen to a apoplectic kind of level at all within the farming ag community yet. But I think it's going to get there, because we just need 2 or 3 instances where jumping worms take out, a couple acres of corn crop, because once that soil structure gets messed up, then corn especially is going to have a really hard time. And if they get just a stiff breeze, the corn will fall over if there's no soil structure to take care of it. And so I think it'll get there, but right now it's on the more I'm going to put valuable on air quotes, ornamental type plants in those types of situations.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Perfect. All right. So I don't keep everybody further than the time I promised you tonight. I will buzz through these other couple things really quickly here, because they aren't as exciting, as let me go back and see. You can tell me, maybe my Wi-Fi is working a little better right now, but oh, it's not playing at all, so it's not even playing on my end. I'm not sure why that is. Let's see if it'll load. Is that working better for anybody? Head shaking? Yes, no?
No.
Oh, bummer. All right. I will, I'll email that to everybody so you can see that. And, but they live up to the name of jumping worms. That is for sure. So that's a bummer that it's not coming across very well. We are in Shakopee kind of notorious for poor signal sometimes. But we'll move on to grubs here real quick. So I found the largest grubs I've ever seen the other day. It was gigantic. And so the grubs that we're dealing with right now are the grubs generally of Japanese beetles. And so is anybody, dealing with Japanese beetles at their house? Is it a big issue? My Japanese beetles have been awful this year, but there's hope. So there's good. But I've edamame, my massive wisteria that you can see here a little bit behind me. It just got destroyed by Japanese beetles, and they're nasty. So you usually don't know you have grubs until you see this kind of thing happening, where the bugs, not the bugs, the raccoons and the birds and other folks really know that you have grubs before you can tell that you have grubs. And so they'll start to pick at things and you'll start to see yellowing and that kind of stuff happening. And so Teresa, evidently you didn't have anything that looked like that underneath with little white C-shaped dudes.
We looked for it, but we couldn't find any.
That's crazy. Yeah, that would be my first thing as to what would happen there, because that's exactly what they do is they shear off the roots and go from there. But the life cycle of actually, Teresa, did you have another question?
No, I was just going to say I have a lot of Japanese beetles too that showed up in the last couple of years. And they just annihilated my rose bushes and anything else they can get their hands on. I'm using the Japanese beetle traps. I don't know if, and I get a lot of them in there, but I don't know if it really affects the numbers.
Yep, it absolutely affects the numbers by bringing in more Japanese beetles than you'd have without the traps. So get rid of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there have been lots of studies around those that I don't have them. I'll restate that. Don't have them near anything like within 100 yards of anything that you care about, because they attract more. Because Japanese beetles are very attracted by pheromones, and so if there's a plant that's damaged by other Japanese beetles, that plant releases an odor that attracts all the other Japanese beetle to it. And so those Japanese beetle traps, they have that same pheromone in there that attracts all the Japanese beetles to them. And so with that, it just attracts more around you and they end up eating things on their way to get to the traps. So if you can put it a long way away from anything you care about, if you're in a large lot or a rural type situation, it'll work there. But if you just have a quarter, third, half acre lot, that kind of thing, you're going to end up attracting more Japanese beetles to your gardens than without having the traps.
So what do you do for those miserable things?
I'll get to that in just a second. So yeah, Japanese beetles, they've been a mess this year for a lot of folks. So this is the life cycle of the Japanese beetle. And so they have right now is getting toward the end. So I don't know if you're starting to see it at my house the last week or so, my number of Japanese beetles has started to taper off a little bit. But Japanese beetles, they'll go through August. And then that right now is when they're laying eggs. They burrow themselves down into the soil. They lay eggs. And so larvae grow. And so this fall is when those larvae are really eating your roots, and they're in active eating stages. And so there's a really important way that you can help to kill those grubs off. And then next spring, they don't eat at all. They just grow. And so then they emerge from the soil, they metamorphosize, and they come out of the soil as Japanese beetles. And so they're really, and they show up in May, June every year. And so this is, you guys aren't going to be able to see my chicken video either if it's not working. But these are my chickens, and I feed my Japanese beetles to my chickens. So it's a lot more entertaining video if you can actually see my chickens being super happy about about eating Japanese beetles. But what you can do first is try and minimize the number of Japanese beetles that are emerging from the ground. So there's a thing called milky spore, and you can start applying that now. And so you apply milky spore to your turf and to your soil areas, and it is a bacteria that goes in, it filters itself into the ground, and the bacteria, it only affects Japanese beetle grubs. It doesn't affect other grubs. Generally, it's just only Japanese beetle grubs. And so it filters into the soil, and then as the Japanese beetle grubs are eating it, eating through the roots and what they're doing, that they also take in that bacteria, and then that bacteria multiplies within them and kills the Japanese beetle grub, and then they spread that bacteria. So it takes a while, like 2, 3, 4 years for it to really get heavily into your soil so that it works. So it's more of a long-term fix, but it's a really, really great way to kill off those grubs. And so it's a bacteria that kills only Japanese beetle grubs, and it takes a few years to get under control. there are a lot of pesticides that you can use to kill Japanese beetles and grubs. They all of them are toxic to bees and pollinators, so we don't want to use those as much as we possibly can. So we want to avoid that. But what I do with my Japanese beetles is every night I'm a little OCD about them, and I've got a smaller yard and garden, so I can do this kind of thing in my situation. But I just go and I grab them and I put them into water and I feed them to my chickens, and they're all happy. But there's also a really good thing that's happening right now is called winsome flies, and so Japanese beetles were introduced unintentionally in New Jersey, I believe it was, in the 1910s. And so there were Japanese beetles obviously came from Japan. It's one time when the name actually works with where they came from. But they came from Japan, and they were very immediately seen as how dangerous they were because they didn't have any natural predators in the United States. And so it was really, really bad, as we see all the time. And so then they imported after that these winsome flies. And winsome flies, they look just like a normal fly with a little striped butt. And the winsome flies are parasites, they're predators of Japanese beetles. And so if you are looking at your Japanese beetles and plucking them off and putting them, you can just put them in soapy water and they'll die there. But if you're doing that, the ones that have the white spot on their head have a winsome fly egg, and it looks just like this. And so this is actually a picture I took, and so you'll see 1, 2, sometimes 3 of those little white spots on a Japanese beetle head on the carapace. And so with that, you don't want to kill these guys. You want to, I just take and toss mine as far away from my edamame as I possibly can. And so just because they will, once they get an egg on them, they'll be dead within 3 or 4 days. And so that egg will hatch and it will burrow itself into the Japanese beetle, and it will eat the Japanese beetle from the inside out. And that Japanese beetle will lose its ability to fly. It'll drop to the ground and it burrows itself in the ground. And that's where that larvae from the winsome fly overwinters. And then it will emerge in the spring as a new winsome fly to kill more Japanese beetles for us. And so winsome flies are one of my favorite things right now. So it's it's a beautiful thing. So if you see these with the white spots on them, I follow a bunch of folks on Instagram, and there was somebody who was showing they pluck Japanese beetles, and they're really bright white, so you can see them pretty easily. And so I was talking to her the other day. She's like, I don't know what to do. Should I kill them or should I let them live? And I said, absolutely let them live, because each of these winsome flies will then lay between 70 and 90 eggs. There's only one generation a year of winsome flies. And so they'll lay between 70 and 90 eggs each summer on Japanese beetles and kill those guys off with us. And so they were imported after the Japanese beetles, but it has taken them between 50 and 60 years to kind of start to control the population as they spread. And so we're just starting to see them now in Minnesota. So it's pretty exciting, as you can tell. I'll bop out of this here. Any questions on the Japanese beetles or anything like that? Nothing? All right.
Don't they have a cycle of 7 years? I thought I heard that they go a cycle of 7 years.
No. Yep, cicadas have a 17-year life cycle, and they're in the ground for 17 years before they come back out. But Japanese beetles they have one generation every year that come out for Japanese beetles, and they're gnarly. They're tough to deal with, and they love roses. They love basil. They just destroy my edamame. They love raspberries. Trying to think of what else they love. My wisteria they love. So there's lots of things that they like to go after. So yep, just once there's a one Japanese beetle population per year. So yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear. My chickens have been loud tonight, so I don't know if you heard my chickens at all. But so I will bop through these other couple things that we've got here. So cabbage worms are another bane of my existence. Cabbage worms are just brutal. I've never had cabbage worms until last year. And so I've been in battle royale with my cabbage worms, but they are nasty little dudes that just annihilate whatever they're around. And so I pluck them and I squish them, and it's very satisfying. I've started to use a lot of neem oil and BT, which is another bacteria similar to what we were talking about with the grubs earlier. You can spray it on the caterpillars and use and kill them that way. So it's a bacteria that invades, and it takes care of them for us. So I'm keeping things under control that way, but they're brutal. And if you get a lot of them, you can use insecticides, pesticides, but most of those things that have insecticides in them are also deadly to, again, pollinators and bees and that kind of stuff. So we want to avoid those as much as possible. Aphids are the same way. Aphids haven't seemed to be as bad this year for many people because I think because of our dry, hot weather. Aphids do well when it's a lot cooler and moister, and so we haven't had as many aphids this year. But aphids, usually you can just spray those bad boys with water, and they're so dumb they can't get back on the plant, and so you can spray them the undersides with water and just reduce that. They don't do a ton of damage unless there are huge numbers of them. They suck the liquid out of the plants, and that's a bad thing. And neem oil also works really well in aphids if you've got a big population. And insecticidal soaps, there are some very mild insecticidal soaps like Safer Soap and things like that you can use, but any insecticide, pesticide will be damaging to other folks. Sawflies are just you're not going to be able to see this one either, probably. But if you're not familiar with sawflies, they are just mean little bastards, and they rear their head at you, and they're just they scare me. I don't like them at all. But sawflies, they go into groups, and they fight back basically, and so it's a really interesting little caterpillar larvae. They can cause significant damage to a lot. In the spring, they do to mugo pines. If you've had a mugo pine, they'll just annihilate mugo pines. But there's also another crop of them that's a different type of species that can be on many different plants that comes out that you'll sometimes see in the fall. So that's why we kept this one in here. And so they attack weaker, older plants, and sawflies can do just a ton of damage on pines, like I said, mugo pine, especially in the spring, but a lot of different types in the fall. And so sawflies, since they are so very damaging, and they'll do damage within days, you can not know that they're there, and they'll just take over. And so generally we recommend people using an insecticide to take care of sawflies if it's on a plant you'd like to save. So that's there. So then real quick, just a little bit about me is that I live in Shakopee. I have a horticulture degree from Iowa State. This is my wife and two kids down at Minneopa. Last summer, it was hot that day. It was really warm that day. So I've been in landscape and green industry pretty much my entire life. Like I said earlier, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and I have been really involved in a lot of different things lately and haven't been as involved in the green industry as I'd like to be. So this spring we started what we call the Minnesota Gardening Club, and it's just for Minnesotans, and it's a great way to learn about landscape and gardening at any skill level. But we work a lot with folks that are just getting into gardening. So obviously a lot of folks started with gardening during COVID and are just getting going with things, but we take folks and help them get to the next levels in their gardening journey. And so people can get a lot of bad information and feel bad about themselves with different Facebook groups and Google searches and those kinds of things. So we eliminate all that. And so we focus on landscape, fruit and vegetable gardening, sustainable lawn care, and Minnesota plants. So those are the four areas that we really work on. And help people grow and get better. And so it's $10 a month is how the Minnesota Gardening Club works. And we just started this spring, and we are at 33 members, I think is where we're at right now. So we're just getting going, and it's just a ton of fun. And it's a lot of fun for me to be involved and helping out folks and figure things out. And so with this, we have monthly gardening club meetings. We have experts come with us most months to have our monthly gardening club meeting. We have weekly trainings. And so a lot of, especially newer gardeners, were just overwhelmed and lost as to what do I do now and how do I go to the next steps in getting things done. And so we put together calendars and weekly trainings for this is what we need to be doing this week. And so our past week was succession planting. So working on as your peas and your radishes and different things in your garden are being done, what you can do next step. So direct seeding into the gardens and starting seeds for having broccoli and cauliflower and those types of things in your gardens. So we go through a lot of trainings that week. And so it's each week. And so this next week is an easy one. It's all about making sure that your air conditioner has enough room around it so that we'll be in a hot spell next week. So it's just a really great group of people who care about gardening and want to learn more. And so then there's a foundations course that everybody goes through that sets, this is what sustainable lawn care looks like. And you can take that information and adapt it to what works best for you. This is what calendars for growing a garden. If you want to start your seeds, when you need to do it in March, those types of things that we help people go through. And then everybody gets a consult with me. I'm always on the group and we do it through an app on everybody's phone. And so it works really, really great. So it's a lot of fun. And if people join today, would love to have more members. This is the first time we've opened back up for new members. We kind of kept it closed for 2 months here just to get our feet under us and to see what people wanted to do and how it all worked. And would love to have people join. So we got a lot of great information like you went through tonight about jumping worms and different things like that. And we talk all about just information people need to know about gardening. So it's minnesotagardeningclub.com. I'll obviously send everybody the link for that as well, but would love for folks to join. And so you'll be in order to get in, we close again at 8:00 on Wednesday. So I want to bring everybody in to build the community and build questions and to answer questions all together as a group so we can have a cohort of new folks. And so we have a party planned online party, 8 a.m. on Wednesday, and would love anybody who would like to come along to join us. So there we go. So yeah, if people have questions about the gardening club, if people have questions about anything else, I can stick around. I only went 2 minutes over my time, which I suppose is okay. That's tonight. But if you have questions about anything else, I'm happy to answer any questions and stick around as long as people would like. Anybody else have anything you want me to focus on? All right. Awesome. Well, if anybody is interested, the gardening club it's just a lot of fun. And it's just $10 a month and it covers my costs on things and we get a lot of information out. And if you would love to join or want to be part of something like that, it's a really good thing. So if anybody, you all have my email now. If at any time you have any questions or need anything or want more information about jumping worms and that kind of stuff, please just let me know. That's what I do is I'm here to help everybody out. So thank you so much for being here and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the information.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Fran. This was good.